Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the new split idea that came out about the revenue sharing house agreement that dropped about a month and a half, 2 months ago. They're trying to figure out how to split that among the athletic department, and it sounds like football is going to get a big chunk of the cake. So we'll break that down as it starts to come out more and more. But for right now, let's talk about Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel and the praise they had for this Ohio State roster. As we all know, Ohio State is rolling into this season with as much hype as ever, and where there is hype, there is a ton of pressure, and they are walking in with more pressure than anyone in the country. I think everyone understands that, frankly. And you worry about the O-line, you worry about some different areas of this team, but overall, I don't necessarily disagree with them. There's a ton of really good rosters out there, and especially this particular year, Ohio State takes the cake if you were to ask me. I think Georgia's right there, but as of right now, I can't find one better than Ohio State. But let's get to their comments and then get to this roster and kind of break it down for you guys. So it's a very interesting kind of way to look at it because Urban Meyer is a very, very complimentary person, let's put it. I think Zach Barnett over on Football Scoop put it so well. He called him superlative urban, where if he goes to a restaurant and doesn't say it's the greatest food he's ever had, you don't want to go there. It's bad food. But that is not necessarily the case for Jim Tressel. He's a little bit more reserved, a little bit more not as willing to give out his high praises to people. So while you might say, Urban's comments were, as of right now, he said, as of now, this is the most talented roster of the last decade, maybe ever. I mean, that's a big statement. They've got to play, but look at the quality athletes at every position. I've never seen anything like it. First of all, he is going to say that type of thing. He is that type of guy, but he's not necessarily wrong. This roster is just ridiculous top to bottom. It has about 3 levels of depth that you could play at any given moment. It's just absolutely insane. And then Jim Tressel said, I don't know if I've ever seen that many great players in that building all at once. Every position, every place you turn. So Jim Tressel was more talking about Ohio State in general as a program. And frankly, I totally agree with him there because I haven't necessarily been watching Ohio State for the entire history of their program, but I've been watching for quite some time, and no one is this 2024 team. There are really, really talented teams in the past for Ohio State. This one is just different on either side, on both sides of the ball. So it'll be really interesting to watch this team unfold. But let's start to break down this roster a little bit and give you an idea of why this isn't necessarily the most far-fetched thing in the world. So quarterback's the funniest one in the group because the talent is not at the top line. No disrespect to Will Howard, he's plenty talented himself, and Devin Brown is also a very good player, but the reality, when you look at this quarterback room and you're saying who is the most talented kid in this room, or let's say who has the biggest ceiling in this room, you go to Aaron Nolan and you go to Julian Sayin. Those are the guys that have the ability to absolutely light the world on fire, but currently they sit about 3 and 4 or 4 and 5 on the depth chart. So we have to wait a little bit for them. Not to say, Will Howard is plenty talented and I think will execute this offense really well. But when we talk about the quarterback room, the talent is a little bit younger than you like it to be right now. But the running back room is just absurd. Travion Henderson, to me, is one of the best running backs in the entire country. I think as long as he's healthy, he has the ability to be the number 1 running back in next year's draft. Quinshon Judkins is one of the most pure, best pure runners I've seen in quite some time. I think he can just absolutely blow up in this offense. They also have James Peoples, who came in as a freshman, very talented kid. And then we'll talk about another guy that might just be making his way onto the running back rotation in the next segment. But the wide receiver room is always going to be a fun one, and Emeka Egbuka leads the way, but Brendan Ennis, Carnell Tate, Jaden Ballard, Jeremiah Smith, it's just insane what these guys can do at the wide receiver position. Also, if you're watching for a kind of low-key guy to watch, Kojo Antwi, I think, is going to be just incredible this year. Very athletic kid, can do a ton of really good things. Tight ends aren't necessarily the craziest thing in the world, but between Will Kamarack, the transfer from Ohio, G. Scott Jr., and Jelani Thurman, they're going to do just fine there. No problem there. O-line is a very interesting one because I think they're better than people give them credit for. I think they saw last year's team, and it wasn't necessarily that great on the offensive line, but they've only gotten better pretty much across the board. Donovan Smith is going to be one of the best guards in the entire country. I think Josh Simmons is going to be a much improved player, as is Josh Fryer on the other side at the tackle positions. And then when you add a guy like Chase McLaughlin from Bama, you're always going to be a little bit better at that center position. So definitely did a lot of really good work at the O-line. That's the other position that if you look at it, under a microscope, you can find your little issues with it, but I think as a unit, they'll be more than fine. The D-line is maybe the best group of the bunch if you look across this team. Between Jack Sawyer, JTT, Talik Williams, Ty Hamilton, it's just an insane four across that front, and then they go about 2 or 3 deep. So it's just wild. The back end is probably just close to the defensive line, but it's just insane what they're going to be able to do against offensive lines this upcoming year. At the linebacker position, this might be the weakest group of the defense, but it's not weak by any means. Cody Simon's a really, really strong player. Sonny Styles, I have big expectations for, and CJ Hicks is a really, really solid player as well. I think Sonny Styles is going to be really interesting. He used to play safety, but with a lot of the things happening on that back end with so many different players back there, he made the move up to linebacker. He's also a little bit bigger of a guy, so it makes a little bit more sense. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. I'm sure you are if you're a big-time college football fan, but DeMarvion Overshown was a safety at Texas when he came in, moved down to linebacker, and was just a torpedo for the rest of his career. Just absolutely flew off the ball, made some absolutely massive hits, and made his way into the NFL as a linebacker. And I expect the same thing from Sonny Styles. I think he's going to do just incredible things for this defense and just be a really hard hitter in the middle of that defense. And then the back end is the show. And it starts with Caleb Downs. Getting a guy like that on the screen right there from Alabama is like taking a supercharged Lamborghini and just adding rocket boosters to the back. It's insane what they're going to be able to do on the back end of that defense. I don't know if anyone's going to be able to pass consistently on this back end. You have Denzel Burke, who is one of the best cornerbacks in the entire country, especially outside corners. Davison Igbinosun, I've talked about a time and again, I think would be cornerback one on pretty much any other roster in the entire country. Jordan Hancock and Latham Ransom are just really, really good players, and they're probably third and fourth on this team in that position group, which is just insane. And then you have Jeremiah Matthews Jr. and Lorenzo Styles Jr. coming off the bench in the corner position. So it's just absurd what they're going to be able to do. They're going to be able to rotate in probably 8 or 9 different guys in a 5-man rotation and still be able to be effective start to finish. It's going to be absolutely insane to watch this team, especially on the back end. It's wild what they have on this team. So when you look at this team, it's outright insane. From the top level talent like Emeka Buka, Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, Caleb Downs, JTT, all of those guys, to the guys that I think are just going to be really, really incredible depth pieces like Davian Igbinosun, Sonny Styles. I think Seth McLaughlin's going to be huge for them this year. I think there's going to be a ton of wide receivers. Jaden Ballard, I think, is going to make some noise. Brendan Ennis, I think, is a hugely underrated guy. So when I look at this team, it's almost impossible to find a hole. You can, nitpick about Will Howard, but at the end of the day, that's a conference champion quarterback. That's a guy that led his team past a team that went to the national title that year. So I don't necessarily have too many questions. When you look at the offensive line, they've gotten better at every single position. Now, will it be the best offensive line in the country? Probably not. Almost definitely not, in fact. But the reality is, if you get just a little bit better, and Will Howard with his running ability adds a little bit to that offense, things get really interesting. So I don't necessarily disagree with what they were saying, especially what Jim Tressel was saying, because I personally have never seen an Ohio State roster that is like this, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I don't think anyone can argue that. This defense is just absolutely absurd. But the offense, if you were to poke a hole, it would be at quarterback and offensive line, and I'm not nearly as worried about those as some other people are. I think Will Howard is going to add something to that offense that they missed a year ago with Kyle McCord. I think that running ability is going to make it really, really hard to defend him. And then the offensive line, I think it's just going to be better than they were a year ago. And they don't need to be leaps and bounds better. They just got to be a little bit better. So very, very much a big fan of this roster. I think in recent history, I didn't want to go all the way back to like 01 Miami and all of those teams, although that would be a good argument to have, to be fair. You also have 04 USC is a very interesting team to kind of have an argument here with. 2019 LSU, 2022 UGA, pretty much every single Bama team over the last decade. You could have a conversation about a number of other teams, but it would at the very least be a good conversation, because this team from top to bottom, every single position with like 3 guys deep is just insane. If you wanted to poke holes, the offensive line is where you would do that, but I don't know, man. I don't really worry about that nearly as much as other people do because I think Donovan Jackson is a force. I think Seth McLaughlin's struggles at Bama were kind of a flash in the pan more than who he actually is. I think Josh Fryer and Josh Simmons are going to be just really, really good linchpins on the outside of that offensive line. So I don't necessarily worry about the issues that this team has. And if those are issues, having Donovan Jackson, one of the best guards in the country, as at a position where it's an issue, I think you'll be okay. Let's just be honest. So I don't know if they're going to win the title. Frankly, I saw someone a couple of days ago, maybe it was yesterday, say, what will the excuse be if they don't win a national title? You should never need an excuse for not winning a national title. It's really hard. That's, I guess, an excuse, but the reality is winning a national title is really hard. If they lose to Michigan, then we're having a conversation. I'll give you that. But if they do win a title, if they do, do all that stuff, it'll be partly because of the talent of this roster. If they fall short, it won't be because of lack of talent. I can promise you that. So they have plenty of dudes. They got to make sure that they make something happen this year because the pressure is huge on this team, and it just got added just a little bit by some of the predecessors for Ryan Day, but that's the reality of the sport. When you have a roster like that, you're going to get expectations, and Ryan Day really has expectations with the last couple of years. So it'll be interesting to see how all of this unfolds, but when you look up and down that Ohio State roster, it's kind of hard to argue with Urban and Jim on this one. I'll be totally honest with you. But we're going to take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about two-way players. Travis Hunter took the world by storm last year when he was just incredible all year. But there's a couple other guys that I want to talk about that might just be looking that direction. So I want to break down those guys, and then a couple other guys that I'd love to see play both ways right after this. So stick with us.